What done also that is second or Marba Sanji and Sat Sanji Vitushe and the Sanji Trumpet Duce, Sanji Gunyang Sun Sandu or Marba, Saga Monju Dolores, and also choose Gawachi Dua in a Goambon Drug Penny waters.
Dawa de Kanga.
Okay. That's second was that Gene Jungi Batuta, George Igris.
So this is considered the month of the Buddha, Sakadawa. And during this month time, it's a very auspicious occasion where one virtuous activity that is engaged in is equivalent to 100,000 virtuous activities. So it's considered a time of increase, or the month of increase, because of the virtue is increased in that manner. So it's the month of the Buddha, Sakadawa. I'm sorry, and Sakadawa is the celebration of Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and passing into nirvana. So those three qualities, Gonga Mepa Chik Rinpoche, the Nyanele De Lab Masa, the Gate Jason. So the Chinese Buddhists say Dawa Lama, it was the month before, previous month for Sakadawa. In the Chinese calendar. But in the Tibetan tradition, it's this month, these days, this month.
What did you say?
So if one has time, it's very important to go for religion, or practice Dharma.
That's
So we will once again be looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment, which is a commentary on Atisha's lamp for the path to enlightenment. Less so.
Lanchi Naja never Jebatan, Lanchi Naja never Jebatala, Jebu Sun Jelanto, Modo Tajan Dubi Sudan, Hebelans Ungerva, Nije, Tan Hebelans Ungertala, and then Nirva, and then Jebu Sun Jitan to Kasa,
Jutsen,
Dubi Sudan, Tadative Jusen Yimarva. Jusen Tala Jusen want to go by knee. What to the Kangatan, Hebel Sweet La, Sumarba, Jebu Chungu, the Tumu Samba Jamba, Jebu did the Tumu Lodge, Samba Jebu Lodge, Sumarba, that Jebu Chungu Lodge, Jambala Samba Jamba, the Katule Marba, Tela Samba Jamba, Samba Chip, Tela Luduka was Sumarba, that Jebu Chungu. 아주 좋은 가도로.
Ninge the Kanga Lagi. Okay. The Kanga Lagi. Okay. So the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, which is a commentary on Atisha's lamp for the path to enlightenment, begins with an outline of 4 categories, and this is a presentation of the content to come. So the first category is the greatness of the teaching's author, referring to Lord Atisha and the liberation life story. The second is the greatness of the teaching itself, referring to the lamp for the path to enlightenment. The third is the great way to listen to and explain the teachings. And then the fourth is how to train in the actual instructions, or the stages of the path that one engages in. So these are the first 4 categories that identify the outline of the content of the material that will be to come. And within that, when we get to the fourth category, which is actually called How to Lead Students in the Actual Instructions, that's the category heading, it begins with two categories. First, how to rely upon the teacher, that is the root of the path. And then the second category is what to do, how to train the mind in the stages once one has relied upon the teacher. So what the stages are to train in after one has relied upon the teacher. So we went through relying on the teacher, that's the root of the path. And under that category, where we find two categories, an exhortation. I'm sorry. So we have let me just back up. How to train the mind in the stages. So it begins with how to rely upon the teacher, that is the root of the path. And then we have an exhortation to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, and then how to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. Under the exhortation to take full advantage of life of leisure and opportunity, we find three categories. And then after that category, we find how to take advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. And under that heading, we find two categories. How to develop certain knowledge of a general presentation of the path, and then how to take advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. Under the category of how to develop certain knowledge of a general presentation of the path, we find the first category, which shows us how all instructions, all teachings are included within the stages of the path for beings of three capacities. I just want to make sure I want all these. Okay, so we're there to there. Stages. Okay, so exhortation, the three categories. I just I'm checking my translation because it's all here, so why not? So then we get to the develop certain knowledge of the general presentation of the path, is where I just left off. So that has two specific categories. How all scriptures are included within the presentation of the path of three types of persons. And then the second is why students are led in stages through these instructions. So there are two categories there. So this is under I know it's a lot of headings, but it's just how the outline is in the great treatise in the stages of the path to enlightenment. So first you have how all instructions are included within these teachings for beings of three capacities, and then the reason for leading students in stages. And under that category, there are two categories: the purpose of leading students in stages, and then why. And then that second category has two categories: actual purpose and reason. So it goes through a list of the reasons and purposes of leading students in these stages. So that's under the how to develop certain knowledge of a general presentation of the path. And then the actual way to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity is where we've left off. And in that section, we find three categories. Training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of small capacity, training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of medium capacity, and training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of great capacity. So in that first category, training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of small capacity, there are three categories. The first is the actual mind that one develops, so that how to develop that actual mind. The actual training of the thought for a person of small capacity. The second is the measure of an attitude of small capacity, say. And the third is lotukaba, clearing up misconceptions concerning the attitude of a person of small capacity. So this is the three categories under that first heading, which, and again, in the outline, we're under the actual way to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. That's the actual way. And that's under the subheading of how to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, and the second category within that. So it all follows in the order of the Lamrim outline.
중국 상바지 왕고 더 제비치 들어로도 가봐 중국 상바지 왕고 들어 단니 말에 이제 셔마 되니 질로 제바다 이제 셔마도 더 대마 맞아 Jide Shamas Jiwa Shamarba.
Less so.
Jiwa Shamal Hatami, there's a Tuna Nabi, San Lutter Shangwaris, Jibu Chung, San Ludo, Tuteres, Jide Shama Jiba Town, Jide Shama di Totemas, Jide Shama di Totemas, Jibu. Dendri lang de marbe konjo son la jason de yukune magi jubong tsudin ka to judo son dibala sha na chia woto so le go jirba woto le do sare.
First category, the actual training of a thought for a person of small capacity, has two categories: developing a state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives, and relying on the means for achieving happiness in the next life. So there are two categories. So that first category, developing a state of mind. What is this? What is this state of mind? It's a state of mind that wishes to end lower realm rebirth and achieve higher realm rebirth. And it says for the sake of future lives. So rebirth inferring the next lives to come. One wishes that in one's lives to come, he or she will be born in the higher realm. So this is the state of mind that's being spoken of. So it's how to develop that thought, that actual state of mind. And then the next is relying on the means for achieving happiness in the next life. So next life, in the future lives. Means here is referring to method. The cause. What is the cause for achieving happiness? Happiness referring to rebirth in the higher realms. So means here referring to a pathway which leads to the higher realms of the gods, humans, and demigods. So when we're looking at the means or the method for achieving that higher realm rebirth, we find the topics of engaging in the ethics, which abandons the 10 non-virtuous activities, going for refuge to the 3 jewels of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and acknowledging one's downfalls. So we find those categories of practice, and those are the pathways which lead to the higher realms. They are the means for achieving happiness within this scope.
제타주 도안이 도도 상바서 어디 사진이 담불라지 저 마고미님이 공부해 안에 저 담비로 제타버시 제바 저와 담바 공부수 담불 사진이 뭐 어디 말이야.
So then developing a state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives. Again, we're on page 144 if anyone wants to follow the outline. The commentary is Rinpoche's, but the outline is right here that we're following. So the actual thought for training of a person of small capacity. We have developing a state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives and relying on the means for achieving the happiness in the next life. So that first category, developing a state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives, has 2 parts. Mindfulness, which has the first one, which has 2 parts, mindfulness of death, and the contemplation that you will not remain long in this world. And then the second category, contemplating what will occur in your future life, the happiness or suffering of the 2 types of beings. So we're 2 categories into that. And then the mindfulness of death, contemplation that you will not remain long in this world, has 4 categories. The faults of not cultivating the mindfulness of death, the benefits of cultivating mindfulness of death, the kind of mindfulness of death one should develop, or the kind of meditation on it, or this kind of awareness of the impermanence and death one should develop, and how to cultivate this mindfulness of death, or mindfulness of impermanence and death. So these are the 4 categories.
Chowa temple chadabu cheba sayate tamarbe ta chowa madaba dan sayate nanga so te lari chimchina de doa somba tamarbe somba chowa temple lu chadabu cheba sa ta kande chowa madaba temple lu gongur saya chowa temple ni yoris ta nga chogi na su ma sheba che ane Tanga Shendegre, Pamata Tendegre, Pinjata Tendegre, Drubutan Tendegre, and the Suru Yidon, Jalatus Tendegre, Chabajene, and the Shinachi as you are. What did Sandan Petua Maris? Could just a change it the la and later Yomongi, just a change it the Shendegres. The Singing Chuniris, Majanba, May Chuni, Chotun or Chuni, and the Singing later Yomo, just a change it the la Shendegres, Singing Chuni, the Shinalana, can't do Marimetu your Maris. That's how Mata when I go out the Carosana, then call Kujini, call Kujini, Jukunu Demba, never doing Demba, and a call Trijunaji Demba, Debungu then. The soon next with the Abashe, Chibuchung, Dendru Lang, Tabi Lang, and then Sanji Gung to Lang next with the Abashe, or Tanga Shasuna, and then Gawai Duyabu Madiba Mubasasare, National Chigrinan, or to Chamada Gungina, and the co, and then Dungan Jutan. Or the Jebu Dungan to next with the Abashedu, the Nabutoni Goya, and then Tingans Goya, or the Gumbalatene, and the Shakal Matabaji to Grace, what does not Marba?
Shaka Mataba, the Gom. Okay.
Should next to Shen Matab Gongina? Could the game Goyak Jut, Tony Goala, so what to say?
So now looking at that outline again, there were those four categories. So we're going to get right into where we left off. But the third category is the kind of mindfulness of death you should develop. So here, when we're thinking of impermanence and death, and one starts to think of the fact that he or she will die, then recognizes that one will be separated from one's loved ones, relatives, friends, house, cars, all of the things that one has, and relationships will all be severed, will all be ended. So this kind of craving and this fear of losing these things is not the kind of mindfulness of death that one should cultivate. So the fear of losing these things, the fear of dying and being separated from these things is not mindfulness of death. It is a fact. It is the nature of death, but it is not the kind of mindfulness of death that we're talking about here, because it gives rise to a fear of losing or being separated from one's things that becomes attachment. So when one really recognizes that sentient beings die, the nature of a sentient being is that he or she has the impermanence of death. So fire necessarily rises when there are flames, they necessarily rise up. Likewise, so the nature of fire is that the flames rise up. Likewise, the nature of a sentient being is that it perishes. A sentient being perishes or dies. So here, the kind of mindfulness of death that should be developed is what happens when one starts to analyze the Four Noble Truths. When we look at the two cause and effect relationships that are found within the Four Noble Truths. There are the first two truths, which have this cause and effect relationship that shows how one is bound to cyclic existence. It shows how the origin of, so the superior truth of suffering and the superior truth of origin of suffering shows how the origin of suffering is the cause of the suffering itself. So this is the first cause and effect relationship. And this shows how one is bound to cyclic existence. So one analyzes this. And then the second cause and effect relationship we find are among the last two truths. So the truth, superior truth of cessation and the superior truth of path. And these two truths, the path is what gives rise to the cessation. So these two truths have a cause and effect relationship and show how one is freed from or unbound from cyclic existence. So when one begins to analyze these four truths and analyze the state that one is in, one will recognize that it is sentient beings' nature to die, and that because of previous lives and our previous familiarity with non-virtue and the immense amounts of non-virtue that we've accumulated, that when we die, we can descend to the lower realms because we begin to analyze the Four Noble Truths and recognize that in dependence upon non-virtue, we are born into the lower realms of suffering and have to suffer. And in dependence upon virtue, we are born into the higher realms and experience happiness. So when we analyze the Four Noble Truths and begin to recognize the nature of these things, we begin to realize the necessity of practicing religion or practicing Dharma. And we begin then to apply opponents to the non-virtues we've engaged in and begin to meditate upon impermanence and death, begin to meditate upon emptiness, and begin to meditate upon bodhicitta, and then, I'm sorry, not bodhicitta, I'm sorry, single-pointed concentration. So then these become our practices as a result of analyzing the Four Noble Truths and at first analyzing impermanence and death. So here, this is the kind of mindfulness of death one should cultivate. The mindfulness of death that recognizes that one will die, future lives, there's two rebirths, and all of the content within the Four Noble Truths are what are being referenced here. Not an attachment to losing one's things.
다 지금 저 저런 뭐송도 대수 수송도 sana 안 된줄 놀고데 저러 소리 봐 네 löwen 바위로 löwen 바위 저러 소리 받는 송도 저러래서 저러래라도 된장 내면에 간라 주서 모로와 지신 다셔봐 이달라 팽바지슈스 어때 대답이 처음부터 받는 거 봐요 말이스 처음부터 가도 말이스 안나 간데 된 원데 된 거스 대들은 지네 주니라 따나 맨나 디바시비 조반주로스 다 가서 그래 퀄리티 준데다 퀄리티 준데다 제부 던드일란도 타빌란도 세아비 셰디여 봐이나 맨나 디바시비 조반주로 내 디바 뭐 사서 시송나 내 손을 찍으려 동해 용그레스 조바 용그레스 게 레장 레바 용마제 안에 용마제 안에 시민설라 안에 개원 뭐시에요 말에 네 대바 뭐 사서 용사 안에 내 손을 찍으려서 도바 용그레스 다 초원 초런 주 집에 뭐 반주로서 어때 마타바도 공고레스 간레 다기 이네 존조와 다다다기 샤와 용마데스 다 간다 저와 통화만 다디바도 가서 먹이 주던 참행하다 대바 모사서 가서 장고요 말레스 대이제부터래 안에 동행 용그레스 안에 가비 주로 공부하셔봐이나 안 대발을 소시가 말했을 시간하면데 가비 용그레스 안에 시가 말에 안 도밤 저밤에 봐 용그레스 어디 손디서 말봐
근데 그 추어 직든 tuning chiron the denji the then the tarpilan dan denjulan la son garshene jawagare the jikden chuni dan jawagare
jene chuni la ta nasa jene chuni la ta nasa marba ma jedundo ba me chuni marba
lasa
chutodro chuni ro
lasa
le dan yomo ba ongi jawa changje shigres the senjing chuni res
lasa
the tabi 네 퀄리티 준데다 그 준데도 그걸로 준이 서마로 준이 된도 줄 세주시네 들어
라서
어들다네 라서 오늘은 어떤가 준 뭐시에요 말 대본 모사서 저버체 못하고 공부하레스
아래 then tarpilon okay
안에 그원사 말 어때 동행 용거서 어때 산타 되는 어때 내부터 공기는 시간하면 시기 말에 가부 용거래 자고 말에 저바 용 말에 어떤 소리가 말이야
the kanga lagwe the long kanga lag okay though you hold fast you cannot stay what okay so here so Lama Tsongkhapa states that there are specific kinds of mindfulness of death that should be developed. So what is the source of Lama Tsongkhapa's information? So then Lama Tsongkhapa quotes two Indian masters. First, the great master Arya Shura, Lopun Bawo, or called Meti Dayan, and the Garland of Birth Stories, also called the Jataka Tales. and then also quotes Aryadeva's 400 verses. So we find 2 quotes in here to support Lama Tsongkhapa's points that he makes within this 3rd section. So here, within Arya Shura's Garland of Birth Stories, it says, "Though you hold fast, you cannot stay. What benefit is there in being frightened and scared of what cannot be changed?" So here, one will definitely die. It is sentient beings' nature that sentient beings die. So there is not a benefit in being scared if there is no way to change it. If this is the nature of life, if this is the nature of a sentient being, what need is there to be scared? But then it goes on to say, thus, when you analyze the nature of the world, humans are regretful at death because they have sinned and have not brought forth virtuous actions. So here, analyze the nature of the world is referring to going back to the Four Noble Truths and the 2 cause and effect relationships within the Four Noble Truths. It shows the nature of the world. We find the truth of suffering, and then the truth of origin, the superior truth of suffering, and then the superior truth of origin. And these 2 truths show how one is bound to cyclic existence. So within the truth of origin, we find that origin is the cause of suffering. It is that which gives rise to suffering. And within origin, we find karma, that is origin, and afflictions that are origin. So these are the 2 types of origin that gives rise to the result of suffering. So then, the next cause and effect relationship are between cessation and pathway giving rise to cessation of suffering. So once one begins to analyze, here it says the nature of the world, this is referring to what is found in the Four Noble Truths, and that is that in dependence upon non-virtuous activities, one suffers, one is born into the lower realms, and in dependence upon virtuous activities, one experiences happiness and is led to the higher realms. So here, it says, when you analyze the nature of the world, humans are regretful at death because they have sinned, because one recognizes that in dependence upon non-virtue, suffering is experienced and have not brought forth virtuous actions. One wishes to have happiness, but virtuous actions give rise to happiness, and one has less tendency towards virtue. That's what one should be frightened of. And it says, they worry about sufferings to come in future lives, and the fear clouds their minds. Because of this regret, because of recognizing that one has engaged in many non-virtuous activities. It says, however, I do not know, so because one is in previous lives, since beginningless time, we've had births, we've engaged in the 10 non-virtuous activities, we've engaged in the 5 irreversible actions or the 5 heinous crimes, but we just don't remember it. But when we analyze the nature of the world, we recognize that we have all of this, and that we have these tendencies that will give rise to rebirth into a suffering existence. So this is what then begins to make someone regret, and then that fear clouds their minds. But it says, however, I do not know of anything I have done that would make me regretful, and I have made myself accustomed to virtuous actions. Why should anyone who abides in the teaching fear death? So abiding in the teaching is referring to applying an antidote, applying an opponent to the negativities that we have accumulated since beginningless time. And so applying opponents such as the pathway which leads to the higher realms, the pathways which lead to liberation or Buddhahood. So these are the antidotes that one applies, the practices found within those categories, to the negativities that we've accumulated. So here, if one recognizes what the nature of the world is and then accustoms oneself to virtuous activities, then there is no reason to fear death if one is abiding in the teaching. And abiding in the teaching is referring to engaging in the pathways that are suggested or are pronounced within the teaching. So here the nature of the world is what the world is. The definition of what the world is, or the experience of the world more literally is. So once one defines that and knows what it is all about, then the rest of the points that are made become valid.
And then
the 400 verses are quoted much more summarized. It's a much shorter summary, but the information is all within it.
Dala tena shina yung waris, nga shigari nyama shina yung waris, jiba yung waris. Jiba tu yung tangshiri, jiba tu pombi sheto, ane dendru lang, ane tabi lang, sanji gombu tubi lang la suba, lojong jigin ina, ane chida la yang kalanjis, shika lama de shigi maris, gabu yung waris, jiba yung maris, wote te insa marbe.
So in 400 verses, Lord Master Aryadeva states, "Those who think with certainty, I will die, give up fear. Therefore, how could they fear even the Lord of Death?" So here, those who realize and recognize the reality or the nature of a being is that one will die, and knows this with certainty, then one will engage in the so one could say a religious person or a non-religious person could say with certainty that he or she will die. But the point here is that implicitly within it, it says, give up fear, therefore. The giving up fear refers to applying an antidote or an opponent. So the three pathways, the pathways which lead to the higher realms, the pathways that lead to liberation, and the pathways which lead to complete Buddhahood. So it says, those who think with certainty I will die, give up fear. And that's by practicing the pathways. So once they practice the pathways, it says, how could they fear even the Lord of Death? So there's no reason to fear death if one is engaging in the solution.
Well, that Chua Magubi Yemi Gumbi Pen, Chua Temba Lujataba Shiba Somba Tachi, that Jeba Chua Temba Gumbi Suzet, Jeba Renwa, Jeba Chua Temba Gumbi Suwate, Larin Chemokuzula, Ancient Tenjana.
Okay, so now we've gone through the third point. And now we're on the fourth point. Rinpoche wants me to find it in English, the page.
Shiba Chua Temba Gumba Nes, Sawson, Jusengo, Tajiba Sunset Marba.
Oh, I see what I've done. I'm sorry. I went too far ahead and I got into there's a long outline next, so I just got lost a little bit. So we're on page 148 now, point 4. Point 4, we're going to find 3 root points, 9 reasons, and 3 divisions. So this is going to be the next different points that are made. Make those 12 rather. 3, 9, 3.
What that Jiba del Chua Temba Gumbi Sud Kandakanda Gungorasana, Zawa Sun Tang, Jusen Go, and the Tajeba Sunjugune, Gungures, Tajeba Sun. That Zawa Sun to show us Never Chua Samba, Nachilla never Meba Samba, cheese Chumatu, Congregation Mabeba, Samba Sun to Zawa Sun to Jet, Zawa Sun to Waterendua, Never Chua Samba. Nachilla never Meba Samba, cheese Chumatu, Congregation Mabeba Samba, what is on the Rendua. That Jusen good, Zawa Red, Jusen Sun good, Jusen Guimber.
Lesser.
Never Chua Samba tell Jusen Sun, lesser. Down the Tabu de Saint Sun is at lesser. Sonje, and then never the lesson, some of the songs in Jusen Go. And Zawa Sun, Jusen goes at what in some of that. Lesser. Then a touch of a sun.
Lesser.
Tajeba Sun de Kasure, Tajeba Sun de Chud Tadajin Duguba Tajeba, Tene Kasa and Pongolas of the Dalachane, and Machaba Chuduba, and what that cheese the Chuma to Kangija Mepeba Tajeba. So Tajeba Sun to the Rendua, Tajeba Sun. Zawa Sun Jusen Go Tajeba, Sonjugune, Gumba Shaos, Tella Suns, that Zawa Sun to Shosana, never Chua Sambas, Leda Nemo Gicha Shenji de la, never Shigres, what the Salmo Tang waters, never Chava Samba, Nachilla never Meba Sambas, and then share there, Magiva to Nalishe, Dins Sugulishe, Chua to Sugulishevaina, Copon in the Euro, Monia Maris, and then Magiva Mashikon, Luchua Shendagre, Luchua Mandin Shendagre, Kungabaka, Nachilla never Mebas, what is it about? Nachilla never Meba Samba. And the cheese, Chuma to Conquer my Pemba Sambas, cheese, Lug Pen to Mare, Lonjo Pen to Mare, Niang Pen to Mare, and the Churchy Buddhist, Chubin, cheese, Chuma to Conquer my Pemba, Sambason to what the thousand things are back.
Rimshe, this Sumba, the Lamrim Chenmo Kabiare, the Tambo Zawa Sum, then Jutsen Go, then the Sumba.
The
Sumba, the
Narration did it, Jatan, Jumesun,
the Jumesun Kabiare. Jutsen, the Yure, Yene, the Sumba, Zawa Sum Yure, Jutsen Go, then they
Jutsen Go College,
Yure, then a sum.
Guru Tache was
The Tache was sum, the Lamrim Chenmo Kabiare. Okay, then ragare. Okay, so within this fourth category, how to cultivate the mindfulness of death, we find 3 specific roots and then 9 reasons. So each of the roots has 3 correct signs to prove it, or 3 reasons behind that root. So the first root is that death is certain, so there are 3 correct signs or 3 reasons that are given in the great treatise to prove that. The next is that the time of death is uncertain, so 3 reasons to prove that. And then that at the time of death, nothing helps except religious practice. So there are 3 reasons to prove that. So the first point, that death is certain, means that one will certainly die. When we look historically at beings, all those who have passed on, there's no escaping death. It is certain, and there's no way around it. So this is the first point that's made. The second point is that the time of death is uncertain, because we see that some people die when they're very young, as children. Some people die middle age, and then there's others who die and are very old. So there's no certainty of when we are going to die. There is certainty that we will, but there's no certainty of when it will happen. And then the last is that at the time of death, there's nothing that can help except religious practice. Our body can't help us. Our enjoyments, the things that we have, cannot help us. Our friends can't help us. The only thing that can help us at the time of death is dharma, or religious practice.
Somebody Samalioda, Jisa Shingel Kangashinuguruda, Shenuare, Samalioda,
Tambo,
Nachilla never there, Sama Shivu Samarbe. Ishuba says, Magimata, Jemata, and Din said, origin Chiba Marbe, Hindu Suelo, Chulu Kangalore, Nechuki, Melancan Suelo Marbe, and Terrible Suelo, then Robinson.
Then a Sumba. Oh, okay. Tambo Dang Nipa. Okay, geez. So in analyzing these 3 points, we could say that, looking at the first, we can say they're in common with other religious traditions and even non-religious traditions. So we would find that Buddhists assert this, but also Hindus and Christians and non-Buddhists might as well, that death is certain. I think there's an assertion that the religious traditions would make about the certainty of one dying. And then the second point, that the time of death is uncertain. I think that they would also concur that some people die young, some people die middle age, some people die when they're old. So this is probably a common idea found within all of these religious traditions as well as Buddhism. Then So, and then this last one would be specific to religious traditions, but maybe not others. So practitioners of religious traditions, this point that at the time of death, nothing helps except religious practice. So that would be specific to religious practitioners.
ngaba chewa sampas ngaba le da nyum mo jesa shinje da ngaba chigres wadil jusen song de tambul le do
Okay.
ane tambul la song les arwa tambul la song les ane ngaba chewa de la jusen song marwa jusen song cheda ngaba on la change do to me bas chewa de ngaba de yongre chen gang ge do to mares ane cheda de ngaba shewa de ngaba de yongre shewa del train ta yo mare ane jasu nam de sil ko na shen de ane re si de ba ko na shen de 원 할이 좋아하는 시그레 미 좋아하는 시그레스 어떤 주선 거든서 말이야 아니 가자 아 사제랑 사제 안 사제 나냐 되던 꼴로는 통제나 조배범 해주고스 아니 사제다 아니 라제다 아니 되다 어떤 참하게 꼴로도 봉사버렸어 통관 고냥을 대해서 시사버려 나서 멋지게 가는 되그랬어 주선 거 말이야 어떤
Listen. So first we have the contemplation that death is certain, so that there's no avoidance of it, one will die. So there are three reasons, or correct signs, perfect reasons that are given for this. The first is that the Lord of Death will definitely come, therefore cannot be avoided. I'll read them all, but we're focusing on the first. Our lifetime cannot be extended and is constantly diminishes, and while you are alive, there is little time for religious practice. But the first point, the Lord of Death will definitely come, therefore it cannot be avoided. It does not matter where one abides. If one abides in the ocean, if one abides in the mountains, if one is born as a god, if one is born as a human, it doesn't matter. There is no escaping death. And there's a quote that says, if even the beings of the past, those hearers and solitary realizers and Buddhas have passed from this world, then what need is there to say about others? So if we've seen that all of these holy beings have left this world, what need is there to speak of ordinary beings or of other beings? So here, the Lord of Death will definitely come means that no matter where one abides within cyclic existence, one will die.
What did you say to go on the Cheda Ngabon? Chen Kangi Jang, do the Maba Sambanes, Chen Kangi do them, Chewa the Ngaba to Yongre, Shewa the Ngaba to Yongre, the Chen Kangi Jang, do to Maris. Le Gendashi Lang Jang, Le Gendashi Lang Jang, Chewa won't this, Le Kanji Lamba, me, Le Lamba in there, Nasung Le Lamba in there, Chewa to Yongres, Matabi Sonless, Matabi Sondon, Matabi Sonless, Kaya Saje Rasaje. Saje na je ne tu jang kulun de ne ponze na chu pe ba me chugus wo jisen ko marbe kan saje je ran saje je ne saje na ne tu je konsu kulu de pon sabres konsu ko nyangal de chu den sabres an nga so ma ji de kan de re ba chigres wo jisen to ko mi samarbe
So now we're going to look specifically that at the point that the Lord of Death will definitely come and cannot be avoided. So here, what we were speaking of before is a quote from, or summarizing or speaking of before, is a summary of the quote from a sutra tradition called the Collection of Indicative Verses. And this found in the Khensur Rinpoche, in the pronouncements of Lord Buddha section, the Khensur, we find the collection of indicative verses. So here it says, if all the Buddhas and their Prachika Buddha and Shravaka disciples left their bodies, what can be said about ordinary beings? So if the Buddhas, Prachika Buddha's vehicles and the Shravaka vehicle practitioners leave their bodies, here, and Rinpoche said, go to nirvana, leave their bodies. So if they cast their bodies aside, what can be said about ordinary beings? So that's the quote, the supporting quote to support the information that was just given. It's exactly the same.
Kan sanje ran sanje na je ne tujang kolon ponze nas. Ana sanje ju ko nyangal de ba ayisna sajiyo marbuta. Sanje shoyo mares. And she zebares sanje she imminent dead day.
Me pension son and drop of becha dasan. Me dasan de
what about
lonko.
Upon the sanje chi zeba temper imminent dead day.
Lesso.
And then you don't know just
yeah. The pension son and drop of becha shit is so
what the valley.
So in the here, we're going back to this quote. Rinpoche and I were just speaking of that Pension Son Andrapa text. I forgot the name of it. It's not right here. The small one. What's it called? Anyway, we have gives a breakdown of the different vehicles and their view of how they die or do not die. So that's what we were speaking of. I always try to translate or give a summary of what I was speaking with Rinpoche about. So that's what it was. And the reason it becomes important is in this quote it says, if all the Buddhas and their Prachika Buddha and Shravaka disciples left their bodies. So when we're speaking of that, and the Shravaka and the which is a hearer vehicle, and Prachika Buddha, which is solitary realizer vehicle, leaving. We're speaking of foe destroyer, heating the state of nirvana. But a Buddha doesn't pass into nirvana in the same way. The Buddha emanates a passing into nirvana, which is like a showing of it, an emanation of it. But the Buddha does not pass in the same way. We can say that yes, there is a passing into nirvana that a hearer and solitary realizer practitioner does, but a Buddha doesn't. A Buddha just emanates that. So we find that breakdown in that Pension Son Andrapa text, because we went over it last week, and then I went and looked it up, and it's very, very clearly presented within that, if anybody's interested in it. I'll look the name of it up after class. I might even have it. I just can't find it.
And the Sanjay Tanya, Sanjay Tukangalo, and the she's about dancing behavior. Khensur Dajum was a Shaguna, and also Mashakadu dealers. What is Joseph Quillim?
The Yanju Surnan, that's Yanju Surnan.
Nothing about cigarettes.
We die, okay.
And then Susumataba Gombayina, nothing about cigarettes. Carrer, Joseph Carrersana, and the Sanjay Dan, Ran Sanjay Dan, Yatukangalo, Dajum Tukangalo, Koyangal de Savares, and Namashakadu dealers. What Joseph Quillim?
So this first reason is for the point of meditation. So we're meditating upon our impermanence and recognizing that we will certainly die. What's the reason that we'll certainly die? And we start to give proofs. We say that, oh, those hearer practitioners and solitary realizer practitioners and Buddha practitioners have all left their bodies. So I certainly will too if they have all done so. So this is what the meditation upon impermanence would be like when looking at this, using this point for analysis.
사자 가봐 대바 이나야 되네 셔 maybe 사자 대사 요 말했어. 아니 바나라메 바날 되나야 셴데 그래. 자수 논 되나야 셴데 그래. 르나무들 시드바 되나야 셴데 그래. What is just had good marbe.
So then it says the same text says no matter where you stay, death comes. Somewhere to live that is unharmed by, so that's the collection of indicative verses, sutra. Somewhere to live that is unharmed by death, such a place does not exist. It does not exist in space, so there's nowhere in space that you can live that you won't die. It does not exist in the sea. There's nowhere in the great oceans that one can live and won't die. And it does not, nor if you stay in the midst of the mountains. There's nowhere you can live in the mountains that you won't die. So this is the meaning of this. There's nowhere to go anywhere that you will be unharmed by death. So death is certain. It's the second point made in that collection of indicative verses. Quote.
뭐 there. 제샤가서 상지기 팬투 말스 레레스. 근데 상지기 샤지 보고지 홍색을 배버.
보고치?
보고지.
오케이.
베킹볼. 지 되는 다원을 잡으랬어. 신다와.
치.
진다와 나만로. 지 자수 나를 잡아 있나 그거 있나. 자네 샤지 마요네 샤자가 세사들레 홍색 가시면 홍색 대시사르스. 다원을 잡다시사르스. 레레스. 자수는 잡다.
자초 강가 샤송. 마모 나시메.
다 상지기 들어봤지 마시지 자요지로다.
This Jatso Shasung, Dawa Shasung,
너 홍색으로 자라.
then the Jatso may cheek, Puguchik, may Shakja.
진다 니다 나를 잡아 있는 너와 온
Ni.
근데 지 홍색으로 배.
Okay.
홍색. 안에 샤자를 마그 샤자가 세사도 홍색 가시면도 보고도 시스터. 너를 이렇게 되시스터. 또 상지 레르지야요 말이야.
In Jatso Deiken
시스터.
Shis. So there's this story about karma and that about the certainty of death during the time of Buddha when the Shakya clan was about to be slain, destroyed, wiped out. And Mugiputra Rinpoche decided to try to save the Shakya clan. And Buddha Shakyamuni said it'll be of no use because of karma. So there was an experiment. Not an experiment, but they tried to save the Shakya clan by putting some in the ocean and then put 2 children on the moon. Through the miraculous powers of Mugiputra, was able to do this. 2 children on the moon and then 1 child under the begging bowl of Buddha. So then after the time passed and the rest of the Shakya clan was slain and destroyed, the begging bowl was lifted up and the child was dead underneath it. And the child, 2 children on the moon, what we were going back and forth was the number of, were there 2 here, 1 there. So the points are obviously about karma and the consistency of karma. But those 2 that were on the moon were also dead and the ocean dwellers were dead as well. So here we find this quote about the space. It's referring over to that story during the time of Shakya clan, when there is no escaping the karma of death, and it was their karma to die. So Buddha said there is no use to try to save them. So it's similar to what Buddha was saying there. Similar to Buddha's, similar to that. Lungchik manga yure.
단들에 들어왔다. 가도 대장 저와 공원에 드니레사 가도 내나 저와 모습이 사주던 여러 많이 바나라메 자주나나메 안으로나 시도 쇼나미스 what 상지기 소화도 샤지 마도 잡도스 셰소사
양지를 라고
다 단디사 말봐
라사
당 허던 시민
라사
허던 시민 뒤 나도야 세제나 체위 좀봐 제바 매바 드니레스 당 하마 세제 그가 시사버레 다다 세제 저 시사레 네 마음이 세제 그가로 함이 뒤기 세제 다디 뒤기 세제 마음이 뒤 세제 제바요 말스 그가 제사 세제 시그레스 드니레스 제로 드니사로 종 쇼던 종와 쇼도서는 하마 말베 네바 하마 세제 그가 시사버레스 쇼던 종와서 단다 세제 세제 버레스 데이 말베 조와서나 레다 sensually dead day 데비 세제 그걸로 셔서버래 다다 세제 세제 버래 마음 세제 그걸로 신더래 뒤가봐 있나 뒤가도 있나 시그레스 요아 제네바 근지 르네 당는 로아 당스 세제 함이 세제 그거 르 당사래 다다 세제 르 당지 버래 마음 세제 그거 르 당는 로그레스 던도던 간을 로그레스로와 대군 지바 케베도 주데 대군 지바 케베도 주데 출라내지 나바 제바 쉬어서 데비 세제 다다의 세제 마오비 세제 참말로 안에 지사 신제를 시고여버데 개바주 시고어스 개베 도주데 도제데 개베 도제데 출라내지 나바제바샤스 데비 세제 그걸로 시사래 다다 세제 세진바래 마음을 세제 셔를 좋아 이장 안에 최년에 제고레스 what is on these amarvete 총들인도다.
So then death's destruction of living beings is no different at any point in the past or future. So the previous beings that have died, the beings that are now alive and dying, and the beings that in the future that will die, have all that one thing in common, and that is the death that is certain. So here it says, the wise know that all who have come and will come to perish. So all those that have died and those that will come will perish, and those who are currently alive, dying. So the Rinpoche was speaking of those who were previously, those who are now, and those who will die in the future. It says all of those all of those types of beings will die. So the wise know this, the scholars recognize this because they know the nature of beings. So the wise know that all who come and will come perish, so everyone dies, leave this body and go to the next life. Therefore, be sure to engage in pure behavior by abiding in the teaching. So this is the meaning behind this. Karma dun lesson. Okay. So we'll take a short break. There's cookies and all kinds of stuff if people would like a snack. And we'll be right back.
도드메바는 하라수 도드메바 세달 준 타요 말에 나 시그레스네 어느 로마 제달 주송나 페도 말 로마 제달 주네 신드 그레스 말베 세달 주비 마타와 단스 하라수 도드메바 당 하시다 녀바 치버레데 레도 녀모 봉 지사 신지들라 안에 시와도 도두 말레스 하게 도두 말
라서
하라수 도드메바네 자볼라 담발레스 자볼라 담바도 까이스로까
라서
손지가 자부지로 송바 인제로와 버나 수진네 레체모 사진 템바 니부다 템바 마지바 마게바 페메바 신도 티바지도 지도 도바제 나라 레진 살로데자 자다 신당 신게바다 시게바다 야가다 로마 타제 당 sentient suja jombu tangje shama taje wane jubi zheba doje doba nwaje doba zedang hatang penje doba lao no mahinos jabu chenpo te jindu jeba chenpo dada wonte dada le jubi zheba doje doba nwaje doba zedang hatang penje doba lao no mahinos je kanshe na kawa tang nawa tang chewa tang guba tang guba wus jabu chenpo gawa ne tala papa zhongshin wong nawa ne meba zhongshin wong guba ne pansong soba tangji zhongshin wong chewa ne su zhongshin wong te teda le gyube zheba doji doba nwaji doba zedang hatang penje je lawa doba lawa na mayi no kakzibe 다 잡을 넘발에 상지가 부지하고 부지 수지는 저 차부지 제용과 이나 신당 자당 저당 강가로 루네 우는 아주 대바로 여바 이나 안 가도 말때 저부 전 타고 말에 네 제다도 돈 뻗나지 제가 나지 지 동에 가이 동에 지 동에 어디 집어되게 대집어대 가자 어디 가서 그래 제가 나시 동을 주는 타요 말했어요. Jun Tayo Mare, and the Nashem and Jalanam and Tegis and Tayo Mare, Hajan Tam, what Shenrezig, what the song is a Marva, Jabucham Gawa, what a doubt that Lil Happen with a chew, the Lun and couldn't Jana. Jabucham Regis at Chaganashi, Dungaji, example.
Okay, so you do not escape by fleeing from death, nor can you turn death away by such things as mantras. So there's nowhere one can go to avoid death. There's not a place to go that one will be death-free, if you will, or free, will be able to escape death. Nor can you turn away by such things as mantras. Mantras are very powerful and have a lot of potency, but they can't stop death. They don't have that power. And then there's a quote from the Advice to the King Sutra. And this is again in the Kangjur section when we're looking at the pronouncements of Lord Buddha. For example, 4 great mountains from the 4 directions being hard, firm, solid cord, indestructible, unsplittable, without fissures, extremely resilient, and massed into one, rise up into the sky and destroy the earth. All the grasses, trees, trunks, branches, leaves, and all sentient beings, living beings, and creatures are crushed to dust. When these mountains come, it will not be easy to quickly run away or turn them away with force, wealth, magic substances, mantras, or medicine. Great King, in the same way, these 4 frights come, it is not easy to quickly run away or turn them away with force, wealth, substances, mantras, or medicine. What are the 4? They are aging, sickness, death, and decay. Great King, aging comes and destroys youth, sickness comes and destroys health, decay comes and destroys all that is excellent, and death comes and destroys life. It is not easy to run away from them or to turn them away with force or wealth or to quell them with substances, mantras, or medicine. So here it's saying that one could not escape this horrible environmental disaster that is being spoken of. If all of these things happened from the 4 great mountains in the 4 directions massed into one, and then everything is crushed to dust. There would be no way to escape it. It says here it would be, you couldn't easily run away or turn away, and you couldn't use your money or magic substances, mantras, or medicines to stop that. Likewise, the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death cannot be stopped, just like that couldn't be. So it's showing the certainty of death, that one will have to experience birth, aging, sickness, and then die, and it's certain. And then one can't apply a mantra and think to escape it.
다 가와서는 다 가서 개부차나 말 가서 보고 주준 것도 좀 담아요로. 저는 그 로조 중앙이 주는 그 조조조 기능 개부차 가와서 또 말을 가와 되게 달라 뽑아 좀 그래서 달라 뽑아. 그 개부차는 또 연락 벌도 매버리는 것도 달라 뽑아 좀 그래서 가와는 달라 뽑아 좀 신고사. 다 나와도 가는 중에서 내면 도와요. 만나봐지 집이요 받은 중으로다 나소나 안에 내매번 조신 원사 내매번 조신 규반의 편성소바 단지 규반의 편성소바 단지 지신 규바되게 안에 편성소바 단지 르롱시 편성소바 단지 조신 원레스 쳐와되게 수은 종으레스 말베 첸데 수도 매버는 말베 수도 세이 되던 나시 대강 임보 수세야 돼 나좀 하당最近呢速度long是long这等那些干如单独就被 long 的速因是最近呢这是多能哈都是那路了 long 的是 long 速度 long 的家伙是说 long 是我说 long 的切中呢现在就我的 long 的这样们我的不是对么那么多的
The tama, the lung, decay.
Chewa su jongxin wong.
Chewa, I like.
Chewa is the dead ro. Chewa is the
dying. Okay, two chena. Okay.
Chewa is the ro. Su jongxin wong de.
Then the chewa garshin the lung. the Yanjur Dets, the Long.
Longa de Chewa.
Chewa.
Chewa de Su Mabazugres.
Oh, life force.
Send the Su Mabarin.
Life force.
Su Jongres. Su Nen.
Okay.
Yeah. Chewa de Sun Jong was Marva.
Lesser.
No, she was a touch and the Su Mabarin Marva.
Lesser.
Su. That Su Jatun do it down. How to say Madadua. Do it, you know. 这到那些刚弄点就吃，里面就是下边呢，那看见那弄的弄，手的弄了家伙是，弄的切从那我切的前面多的，弄开出去就是了，弄了家伙是。
So then, so going to this again, where it speaks of the four, and he said different. Rinpoche said different texts have different classifications, and in this one. We find decay actually in there, in the words. So we typically hear birth, aging, sickness, death. And in here we find the word decay. Decay is referring to dying, the dying process. So decaying, disintegration, dying. So the death is death, that's the ending of it. And the decay is the dying or the disintegration. So here it begins with aging. So here one doesn't want to get old, but one has to get old. One moment by moment gets older. So here aging, it says, comes and destroys youth. So one's youth is ruined by aging. So one will get old. And then it says sickness. So sickness, one doesn't feel good. So when one feels physically ill or not well, this is sickness. And it says sickness comes and destroys health. Health being feeling good. So one doesn't feel good anymore, and that's what feeling good is destroyed by sickness. And then decay comes, the order changes up a little, but decay comes and destroys all that is excellent, and death comes and destroys life. So decay destroys all that is excellent because of disintegration, because of dying. Everything is always disintegrating or coming apart. So disintegrating or coming apart. So it says decay comes and destroys all that is excellent. So everything is slowly destroyed by the fact that it's dying, and then it is ultimately destroyed. So the life force itself is dying, and then the life force is ended. And in the tantric tradition, we find that the mind rides upon the wind. So that's where that life force is. And when one dies, the wind itself leaves. So leaves with the mind itself. So when the transfer of life, or when one dies, that's what happens. So here, the life force is always being depleted through decay, and then it transfers at death, or when one dies. So,
Sanjiga rich Jabujabatil rich Jipajane, or Sungo rich but cheese, Gair, cheese, Nair, what the Chiganachi doing at the Remdu. What the Chiganachi doing later, no more just as she did the cheese, doing a guy doing a cheese, Nai doing it till twin tire, much never doing what she did some.
So here, speaking of these four great mountains, four great directions are referring to the four mountains. Rinpoche just said again the four as birth, aging, sickness, and death. And in here, in translator's note, birth begins the process of dying, of decay. So that's where decay begins at birth. So just as a translator's note, it might be implied within that. It's in the English itself. The four mountains here are really inferring those four: birth, aging, sickness, and death, or aging, sickness, death, decay, whichever way you want to.
lawan ma ino sa do tesu da le lab maris ngomulu da ba inane ya tendichi ya yedro tendisu de isarbe.
So here, where it says it is not easy, when we find the story of Nagarjuna and his life story, we find that he went to a palm reader and was told that he would only live to be 7 years old, and then went to the great master, adept, Sarahapa, and was giving a formula to increase his lifespan, and was able to increase his lifespan to 700 years. So then he, by relying upon the great adept Sarahapa, his practice for increasing lifespan, he was able to live 700 years. So that's why it says it's not easy. So it's to do. So the increase of lifespan is and it was used. He used various practices or mantras. So somewhere in here it speaks of. It is not easy to quickly run away from them or turn them away with force or wealth or quell them with substances, mantras, and medicine. So it's not easy to quell or to subdue them or make them less. It's not easy. The reason that word "it's not easy" instead of "it's not possible to quell" is because we find the story of Nagarjuna, who quelled it and lived 700 years, quelled that death process.
It's
not easy. Yene kon dronson. Yene could say Rinpoche son. Yene dunja dronson. Okay. Okay. So, I just want to make sure it's fine. So this is why it says here it is not easy, but we find that it's possible to lengthen lifespan, to quell things, and we find it in the case of Nagarjuna, who was palm reader, said lived to be only 7, went to the great adept Sarahapa, was prescribed various practices, and dependence upon him, was able to live 700 years. So here we find that there are various practices that one can do to lengthen lifespan, and when we can live to maybe be maximum 100 years if we look realistically, but there are various obstructions or obstacles to our being able to live to our full potential, to the full length of life that we can. And there are practices that will help us to remove those obstacles to lengthen our lifespan. Practices such as the White Tara mantra, the 3 long life deities, the White Tara mantra, Amitayas, and Namgyal. So these are the 3 long life deities mantras that can remove those obstacles so that we can have that longer life.
So the
time of death is very difficult. It says you cannot easily quickly run away from them or turn them away with the force of wealth or quell them with some sort of substance or mantra or medicine. So that time of death becomes difficult to really be quelled.
What does a pant over it in a Mashabazu to Mars?
So not able to stop the death. Beneficial, but not able to, the medicines and things, but not able to stop death.
That and the Kama was the Kabaju. Tata Chinjibashi go, Shaka Masewashi Gubale. Okay, tell it, don't Tata Manjishin, Shaka, Donla Summon de Sunsa. Takama get the Tata Chole, Chomataba, Shina Gugres, and the Kuala Kujinde, Kuala Tujinde, Chibichungun landing along the solution of Chene, and the Chiwalanji Gugres, Shakalamate, and the Gabiyungure, Tagamare, joba meba yungures what ngaso tendejig maris what the song deserve cheka maseba shi goba las oke teledu ngaso teledu ne dada shigo mare shekalam shigo res du ne dada manje shin shekar tangla samande song sa what the long dong do ta yeah.
So then Kamawa, Kamamba, it says here, but it's Tibetan. So anyway, said, now we should be frightened by death. At the time of death, we should be fearless. But we are the opposite. We are afraid. We are not afraid now. And at the moment of death, we dig our fingernails into our chests. So we become terrified at the time of death. But it should be now that we are paying attention to this. So if we during this life, if we engage in the practices of the pathways, sharing common with beings of small and medium capacities and pathways for beings of great capacity, then at the time of death there won't be any fear. Because one has utilized those practices, but we're actually the opposite because we're not afraid now, and we actually just wait till the time of death where there's nothing to do about it to become fearful and react. So that's the meaning behind that. Okay, so I'm scared. So of the root three, the first reason has been covered. So we covered the first reason. So here we find the first point. The Lord of Death will definitely come, and therefore it cannot be avoided. And then the Nebeche got the Jutsen Yanju Surana?
나철라 나바 메바 치즈 슈마도 거기 좀 싸우고 말이야
레서
싸우 너무 나저 내가 쳐도 말이야
레서
내가 쳐도 주세요 쳐다 내가 올라 전 거기 좀 두도 메베지 주세요 너무 말이야
레서
주세요 너무 차 말이야
오케이
다 네바 설런 해보면 되게 봐 맞지도요
레서
주세요 네바들어
레서
second Buddhism
lesso. Okay, so we've gone through in the under the contemplation that death is certain. There are 3 points. The Lord of Death will definitely come, and therefore cannot be avoided. We've already completed that. There is a definite certainty about death. So that's the first point. Next point that we're going over is our lifetime cannot be extended and constantly diminishes. So that's the second point that we're going to go over now. So again, there are 3 correct signs or 3 reasons that are given for each of these 3. So there's 9 points that are going to be made. This is the first point about the first point, and we've completed it. So now we're on the second point about the first point.
답은 나로 수수산다는 거 내가 책을 주생 가르스나 최다 내가 올라 진짜 도도 매베지 주생 지지 내가 책을 철은 해보면 이제 바마치 되베지 니버트 말이야.
Okay, so when we say why do we state that the death is certain? Death is certain because the Lord of Death will definitely come and can't be avoided. Death is certain because our lifetime cannot be extended and constantly diminishes. So this is the way we would look at it in terms of analysis.
다 치다 내가 올라 진짜 도도 매봐서 대비치 줄로 강가 킬렌서로다. 예수다 힌두다. 조시다 남바다 강가 킬렌서 말이야. 치워도 내가 봐도 용거래. 아니 진짜 강가 도도 말해서 강가 나거다. 아니 차리바조 킬렌서로다.
선이바 켈렌야 다다야 이바 다다야.
다 철은 해보면 이제 바마치 되어봐. 대야도 줄로 삼아 킬렌 거지. 철은 해보면 다 로자대야요 나 너무 내배져요 말보다. kun jubu senu goruda, donu goruda. Chalan heba menshi, deji pa machi tuya baas, uluma mabashi goruda.
So here, the next point that would probably be found in common with all religious traditions, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, I'm not sure if Rinpoche said Muslim, can be found in all religious traditions, and also scientists, I think, would concur about the cap on this lifetime and the fact that it's constantly it's constantly diminishing. You have a certain amount of potential, and we're moving towards that limit at all times. So it's constantly diminishing. So then there are various points that are going to be made down here to prove that our life is constantly diminishing and can't be extended. We can't make our life longer than that maximum amount of time, 100 years or so. We can't do that. So it says our lifetime cannot be extended and constantly diminishes. So we're always running out of time, we're running out of life.
Chala never many days, but much do you about somebody else, and to Jubal, or then do incident. Near to Jubal lesson, do choose ancient color. Do it, don't do it. Near to Jubal less, near to Jubal lay,
do they care a champo?
No, near to Jubal, or the Padu Katul Mobi. Near to Jubal, Tata labor, the way you sona, Tata, the way labor you sona. Tea in la Lojang, Geshe Lharampa Tsuhosa. Ned Juvale Tata labor dawa Yonsu Sonasa. Tata also made Tana Majin de Duare, the Mensare, and trading Abujena, and then Loja Jale Geshe Lharampa degrees. Geshe Lharampa Tsuhos degrees. Tell Haba de Marathon with Sheson Batar, Renta doesn't she was that Loja de Tsayo can Jubaina, and come hand down and the Zobel trading Abujena, Loja de Tell more degrees, tell Haba de Machine what is a wizard. Sheson Batar, Renta doesn't she in Osa. The diagram tell Haba de Maris. The Toto Chu Johnson. That Loja de Yoba in a Loja deba in a dead Chu John, T. Baji, Cenzeba, T. Cenzeba Shinto, New De, London Dawa Song Yu, Zejin, Dawa, Sha Song Zela, Sha Jan Yemutan, Salmon Song Yu, Zetosa. Loja deba in a to certain Jubu Zonugres, and a Lode, Dawa Junin Zonugre, Dawa Jin Garage Sasavare, and then Dawa the Shabuk Zunugre, to Setuko, and then also Chundu de Najin, Jubu Zunugres, Loja de Yobaina, Shera de Yomars, Kunju Senus, Zunugre, Jubu Shigres.
So, second is the contemplation that our lifetime cannot be extended and constantly diminishes. And then there's a quote from the Descent into the Womb Sutra. We find in the pronouncements of Lord Buddha. And currently, if we protect our bodies well in order to live comfortably, we will live at the longest 100 years or maybe a little more. So now we currently have this human basis. And this human basis kind of has a cap on its potential lifespan, or how long we can live. It says 100 years or a little more. Maybe a little bit over 100, but that's really going to be it. So it says, thus, the maximum is no more than this. So we really don't have any more potential than this. And it says, as weeks turn into months and months into years, time is constantly going by. So then it says, even though it may be possible to live this long, the time until death passes very quickly. A year is consumed with the passage of months, months with the passage of days, and days with the passage of day and night, also with such periods of time as morning, etc. Thus few of us reach the expected lifespan of 100 years, for much more of our life seems to be finished already, and what remains cannot be extended even for a moment. Life diminishes day and night without a break. And then there's a quote from Shantideva, but Rinpoche just read up to here and just spoke of one needs to take care and to take care of the body and take medicine and do all the necessary things for one's health But even if one does all of those things, the potential to live much more than 100 years really isn't there. So it needs to be recognized that we're always moving towards that, and that our days are turning into weeks, and our weeks into months, and our months into years, and time is passing.
다 녀마다 세서나 녀마서나 모니 안에 녀미 공다 때부터 모니 사소는 녀마도 비지 때도는 말ပဲ어떤지 좋은데 그래서 다다장 하둘라 소바 송베 제베나 체체네 뇽라사 더라왕 하토마시 세 나신스 안에 로자데바이는 하마 몸이 차서버스 세 라마야 해봐 계제 정도 그 렌타요 말었다
Lassa.
매진 제제 녀세도 봐 마체도 예배실 전주 상진도 녀세도 봐 용매바를 세다도 권주신 해봐 그나 용매나 다다 쳐와 제문조사 와도 전주로 모두도 다 녀세도 봐 가서 로자대야 여봐 이나야 안나 로자코 녀마다 세단 다와도 그 주마치 세는 춘도되나지 도는 그래서 선대 다도 고조신스 고바 그나 너바 그나서 전 너바자 린타 요마르스 너바 너바 그나 오메나사 너바자 요마르스 다다 쳐와 제면조서나 간 내가 시그레스 가서 제 시험을 줘도 시그레스 시그레스 내가 시그레스 봐 나바드 셰데 살아 나바만 이제 바마치도 베죠 어디 쉬뉴 주센 땡이 말봐
So then it says, thus few of us reach that expected lifespan of 100 years, for much of our lifespan seems to be finished already, and what remains cannot be extended for even a moment. So life diminishes day and night. So day is finished and then night comes. Day finishes night, and then night finishes day, and then day finishes night. And this time is passing as this all goes on, and there is nothing extending. Some of the lifespan is already finished, and we're getting rid of day with night, etc. So we're constantly moving. Life diminishes day and night without a break. So there's a constant moving towards that death. And again, it says that the maximum here is maybe 100 years or even a little more. So then there's a quote from engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds. So Rinpoche compared this life diminishing to water running. It's just constantly moving. It says without a break. It's just constantly flowing towards that. And then the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life is quoted, Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara. It says, this life is constantly lost, day and night without a pause. So every day that passes and then night that passes, life is being lost or diminished. There is no pausing. It's just like water. It's always moving. And there is nothing which can extend it. Why should death not come to someone like me? So given these facts, of course I will die.
답은 소소 나가봐도 시그레스. 설은 해봐면 이제 바마치 뒤에 배시. 설은 해봐면 자요 말에 그 조부소는 거라서 말봐. 수송도서나 상지 응야도 조발로 송도 안내 샤진도 쉐주 걸 때올 몸도
So when speaking of that lifetime cannot be extended and constantly diminishes, we find Lama Tsongkhapa's assertions, and then we find a quote from the Descent into the Womb Sutra, which is from the Kangjur, and then we find a quote from Shantideva in Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, which is from the Authentic Indian Commentaries, the Tanjur section of the teachings. So we find both of these qualifying Lama Tsongkhapa's words.
된다도 나가봐도 시그레 가르스나 설은 해봐면 이제 바마치 뒤에 배시. 수성도 상지가 송도 샤진도 송도
So the contemplation that lifetime cannot be extended and constantly diminishes, if we say, so if we were to say that death is certain because because our lifetime cannot be extended and it constantly diminishes, if we were to say who said this, then you would say the Buddha stated it and Shantideva stated it.
So then now
there's going to be, now it says, think about a lot of examples.
Chewala Chenyer Roadan Chulun Trabu Jun Boba resides Kane Chuboba Jindu Tsenyudu Senen Roadan and then Shuze Yuba Zone Shuna Ramameba Ranginesu Jewatar Nawatan Gayu Ramameba Chedaki Tondu Chibi Tsuna Godomane Gumbasha, so what the Bomosan, and also Tataro, blanket Taba in a cool on the Rima Dromaro. The Roman Jobu Zuna, then blanket Zeon, treasure machine Taba in the last summer with the Buddha Rima Dumar, Jobu Tena said Tenazun waters, and then Lula Soba Cesar Cososal Tiba in a Kamba represented Koshol Tanyan Marbe. Shembasu, Sentient, you can see Cososal Tidoina, what the Bujadro Marbe. Then Comba regent Chenro Roa Tansa Chulon Tabi, Jun Roa, Resaje, Kane Chuboba, Chundro could do much in Rojagarua, and the Razan Chuboba in the Chunjubun. Jubo Masara Marbe, then I just said what then I Zunu Waris Marbe. Dune, then the Gawat, Chewata, now at the Chiganachi, Dungantige, and the Chedak from the Jubutin was. And Jubushia touch Jubushia, Shol Tanya Lugaris Marbe. Gombish, what did Tongue what did Batamaji Lajan and Sung Donna?
So contemplate this with many examples. When weaving cloth, weavers use no more than one piece of thread on each pass, yet they quickly finish weaving the cloth. So there's one piece of thread turns into an entire woven piece of cloth, one by one, because time is passing, and then it's quickly made into this. And then it says and so this is compared to the life diminishing very quickly. Time passing. And then it says, when animals such as sheep are led to slaughter, they move closer to death with every step they take. So then here's another example, that one is constantly being led to death. One is constantly moving towards death. Not led to, well led to, but moving towards and led to death. And then it says, the water carried by the current of a strong river, or the water in a waterfall on a steep mountain, quickly disappears. So in a river, when the current's running very quickly, the water moves very quickly. And then we look at a waterfall. If the water is coming up the top of a mountain, it is leaving the top of the mountain very quickly and rapidly disappearing. So likewise, our life is moving very quickly towards this same disappearance, or moving very quickly in this same way. Just as in these examples, your life is quickly spent and gone. Just as when herdsmen pick up their sticks and their livestock hopelessly follow them home, so sickness and aging leads you helplessly in the presence of the Lord of Death. In this way, meditate on the certainty of death from many perspectives.
What the Tan Jamba la, Bun Kanda, Kanjubi, Bunjitin la, Dobatara, Mana Soja Tejinosa, and Tata, and then Kuba Jobu Blanket Salado, then I got Su and Rabores, Matabi, Chol, Jobundores, Mana Soja Tejino. Bena Nabara Sebata, Naba Sebata, Comba, Kanta, Kampebe, Sebi Drondo. Batara, Manasu Tentinos, and the Sentient Sayag, Sentient to Cesar Tin to Kamba, Rebudil, then Shol John Gorton, I may suit the Tendabres. Chulon Trado, Bobby Jun, the Bama Jetawa, the May Sendoa, on Hana Duba, Joames. That Chulon Trado to Baba Najin also may set the Dubu Zunu Ware, Yaja Saba Yuayo Maris.
Tata Ian.
No, Kona Jinju Desa. Han Duba Joames, could say about the Aja Saban Zuayo Maris. Kawani Tang, Tontan, they are doing Dambata, no Kona Jinju. Chula Yugu Trebajin, Chula Yugu Trebajin, Marba. Chula Yugu Chula Ramatribaina, Nasa Raman Jubazunu, Martin, Nazo made set what the zone was. Chula Ramatriba.
That again?
Chula Yugu Trebajin, Pena, Shudu, Ta Kaba Maro, Kabage, and the Sijak Gate, the Kuru Kabate, Jubateno, Kurundaba Sajino, Tenaji, Chaganaji, Dungan Tuzuki, Tenan, also Shawl Chiguaras, Shawl Tinuaras. Shuna Nezo Shijitara, the Jin Nata, Gawaii, Mena Cheda Tonto Chesa, Nawata Gawateke, Cheda Tonto Shawl, Jobo Shawazugaras, Cheda Tonto Che, Sheson Batarosa. What about Jijujan?
So then here we find another quote from the collection of indicative verses, the Sutra with Kangjur, pronouncements of Lord Buddha. For example, just as when weaving a cloth you reach the end by weaving individual courses, so too is human life. So when one is sewing something, one is using individual threads, but then quickly is able to weave it into a whole piece of cloth. Likewise, it's like those individual courses that are woven and then end up at the end of being the made cloth. Likewise, the human life is always dissipating or disintegrating in that way, always moving in a direction towards that. And so the individual courses are moving in a direction towards the complete cloth, and the human life is moving into to death. For example, just as those who are to be killed come closer to the killing place with every step they take, so too it is human life. So the human life is always moving towards death, just as an animal that's being led to a slaughterhouse. So as it gets closer to that slaughterhouse, the animal is closer to death. Likewise, every moment that passes brings us closer to death. Just as the strong downward current of a river cannot be reversed, so too the moment of human life is irreversible. So that a river that's moving quickly downward is moving in a real specific direction, and it can't just be reversed and move up. It's moving in that specific direction and always moving or flowing, if you will. So it's irreversible. So you can't just change the direction and make it go the other way. Likewise, life is always moving towards death. Life is hard, brief, and full of suffering. It vanishes so quickly, like the written on water with a stick. So if you were to take a stick, move it quickly across the water, or write something on the water, it disappears very quickly. Likewise, the human existence disappears very quickly, vanishes so quickly. Just as livestock go home when the herdsmen raise their sticks, so sickness and aging lead humans to the Lord of Death. So when a herdsman or a cowboy rises a stick, the animals know it's time to go home, or go back, go to their barn, or to go home. Likewise, sickness and death, sickness and aging of a human being are leading that being to death. So aging being the perpetual dying, the dying process.
다 조지 초카도 쇼네 마다보 공고스 출때 마다보 공도 롤 더버제단도스
Furthermore, it is said that the great elder went to the bank of a river and meditated, saying that the rippling flow of the water was good for meditation on impermanence. So Lord Geshe, the great master, went to a river to meditate on impermanence and this moving closer to death. So here it says the rippling flow of the water was good for meditation on permanence. Going back to that example of the water flowing, constantly moving, constantly going.
That Jachiruba, that George, Kont, Jachiruba down to Jachiruba less. Saison Mata, Donkey, Saison Mata Casa. Saison Mata Donkey did not Saison, Sebasons de Camp, Zogon Zomeca, son January was Rota. Saison, Sebason de Mataba, Tintan Tavares, Mark, Tinko de Mandojagro. Then now you come up on Sebason Gino Waters. Jeje, Kalata sons, Chawatan Chawa, what to looking on the Galta and Roberts in the guy, Yachi, Chidon, Yachi of Sabajiton, or
Shadow job.
Oh, Shadow job, Shadow Sabajiton, Sabajiton, Yash, Zo Sabajun, and then Drunken Yubajan, Donga Sabaton, what to soon in summer. Jeje, Kalata and son. Lui Chenrezig Lutang does not Jobush that is Jubu, Light Marba, Reservoir, Tabo, Jonion, shape to me, when the sons what is that?
So then, the extensive Sport Sutra, it says, also speaks of impermanence with many examples. The three worlds are impermanent like an autumn cloud. Three worlds being the form realm, formless realm, and desire realm, are impermanent like an autumn cloud. So a cloud is constantly changing or moving. So a cloud doesn't stay put, doesn't stay in one place. So all of these three realms are impermanent like the cloud. The birth and death of beings is like watching a dance. So beings are born and then they die. So it's like watching a dance taking place, seeing a being go from an old hotel into a new hotel. So it's like watching a dance, this process of birth and death and birth and death. The passage of life is like lightning in the sky, so a fleeting light that's of lightning. And when we see it in the dark, this lightning suddenly, and then it passes. It moves quickly like a waterfall, so constantly dissipating, and constantly moving, and moving towards the end, constantly diminishing.
Gombi Sudla, Zawa Son, Jusen go Tajibason. That Zawason on Zawason de Nevachewa, Nachilang Bemba. She is a Chumatu, Congregation Mapempa, Tamun Nevachewa the Marba. Nevachewa the Jusen, Sungyo, Sungun Ta, Ni Peshes Hasma. Nevache Tapana Susandana, Angaba Shigres, Chedang Neba on La Jentang to do the maybe. What the Lomo dance one? Can Sanjay Sanjina, you take Colin the Ponzella Suri, Lomo dance one. That never the le, that never share, Jusen Carasana, Sella never mentioned, Geshe Pamachi to a base. Jusen the Marva, Sel never jar the Yomare, Kunjubu was, Jusen Kumarva, what the Peshe do is one.
So if we were to summarize what we've gone through, so when we look at the heading, mindfulness of death, and the contemplation that you will not remain long in this world, we find the faults of not cultivating mindfulness of death, the benefits of cultivation, the kind of mindfulness of death you should develop, and how to cultivate mindfulness of death. Then under the section of how to cultivate the mindfulness of death, we have 3 roots, 9 reasons, and 3 decisions. So the 3 roots are that death is certain, the time of death is uncertain, and at the time of death, nothing helps except religious practice. And then under that section called the contemplation that death is certain, that's what we've gone over today. There are 3 points. We've gone over 2. The first point, the Lord of Death will definitely come and therefore cannot be avoided. So Lama Tsongkhapa uses supporting material from the sutras and states that if even the Prachika Buddhas and Shravakas and the Buddhas have left their bodies, what can be said about ordinary beings? So he gives the examples of the hearers, solitary realizers, and the Buddhas having left their bodies. So what need is there to say about ours? So this is to validate the point that death will definitely come and can't be avoided. And then the points that were made about our lifetime cannot be extended and is constantly diminishing. And then we find quotes from the sutra as well as Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life to support those points. So we've gone through the 2 points about the first reason, about the first root, and we will move on in the next classes. So we have this in English, so that if we can go through it slowly, we'll start to become clearer, and we'll start to realize it or understand it, become clear. So very good. Thank you all for coming, and let's do the concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. And again, that text was called An Overview of Buddhist Tantra, a general presentation of the classes of Tantra captivating the minds of the fortunate ones by Panchen Son and Drapo. It was referenced before. We were at break, I found it. So we'll begin with the concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. Sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. Holy, I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Lobsang Drakpa to shine forever. Send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri and likewise Samantabhadra as well. Whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the 3 times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. Ao, powerful Avalokiteshvara Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara. I pray for the long life of the precious Khensur Rinpoche, holder of scriptural and realizational doctrines, a spiritual friend who trained extensively in the 5 great philosophical texts with exceptional perseverance. Tuji Rinpoche Gutsi Shabi